without any further ado, Judge Eddie Harrison.
Thank you so very much. When she was talking all that introduction, I was looking around to see who that was. And then I realized she called my name. But I'm real happy to be here today. I'm just real thrilled for the opportunity to be here and to talk about a topic that's so dear and near to my heart. But you know, as I got here, before I start talking about my topic, I was shocked and happily shocked to see so many of the people who have helped me get to wherever I got to in life. And I'll just take a few seconds to identify some of these people. I know I'm going to miss somebody. But there's Mel and Willie Pruitt over there. Would you hold your hand up, please? These people have... We old Purviewites, and he was a star football player down there, and we used to cheer him on. Then we got some other people here, very important to me. That's Doyle Moore, back in the back. Doyle Moore is my supervisor. He used to sign my payroll check. Then another gentleman that's really helped me through life, and that's Linus Hope. Dr. Hope worked for A&M, and we was in the Army Reserve together. We used to go to a lot of summer camps. And at summer camp, we would go to the chow hall together. And we talked about life and people. And he taught me a lot about how to get along with people and how to get people to get along with themselves. So I really appreciate his input in my life. Then there's Jim Boone. Jim Boone and I was in the Army Reserve. He was the S3 of my unit and a communication officer in my unit. And we used to do a lot of things to train folks for combat and other stuff too. And then we got Brother Jones back there, the veteran, a veterinarian that is. Brother Jones we used to teach classes together. He was captain, I was a captain, and we taught all kinds of subjects in the military, and we had a lot of time. Now another gentleman that's really important to me, that's Dave Rusink. Dave Rusink is over here. Dave Rusink is a rural sociologist. And then Dr. Kunkel is not here, but when I went and got my master's degree, I don't know whether Dave told him, but somebody said he will not be an educational person anymore. I'm going to put him into rural sociology. So I have a degree in rural sociology now. We're just so happy to have you people here with me today and to come and listen to what I got to say. But basically what I want to talk about is the exploits of the Buffalo Soldiers. And I know most of us have heard about the Buffalo Soldiers. But one of the things I want to be sure that we get away from here today, understanding what they really are. Because you've probably read or heard on TV that the Buffalo Soldiers have done some wonderful things, and I think they have, and we'll talk about a few of those. But what I'm more concerned about is you understanding what the real meaning of a Buffalo Soldier is. From the literature you read that they got the title of Buffalo Soldiers from the Cherokees, Comanches, Kiowa, Native Americans. And that probably is true. And some say that they got it because the hair was kinky, like the hair on a buffalo. You'll see that in writing, and that may be true. But one of the things that I want to tell you was the Army, the U.S. government, none of those folk ever designated any unit as the Buffalo Soldiers. They got that nickname from the Native American. I was able to do some oral research to find out exactly what happened. And this is my version of what happened. These Native Americans recognized these soldiers as tough, tenacious fighters. They would go into battle and they would say a prayer before they go into battle. That prayer goes something like this. Dear God, you know I'm going into battle today, and I want you to do 2 or 3 things for me. One, I want you to forgive me for all my sins. I want you to take them out and throw them away in the sea of forgetfulness. Then, Lord, I want you to give me victory. Let me win this battle. Then, Lord, I know that may not be in your plan. And if so, I want you to let me die quickly and come on to heaven with you. Now, when they would do this, they meant it. they was some rascallion sometime, and they knew they had some baggage. But they asked the good Lord to get rid of all of that and go into battle. And they had every confidence that they were clean, they was all right, and if they died, they were going to go to heaven. So what they would do is see the enemy, and they charge right in. They pull their weapons out and bang, 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 no stopping, no nothing. All them West Point people would do a line of scrimmage and load, aim, fire, you know. These guys didn't do that. They just pulled out their guns and rode their horses and charged right in. Now this was a strange way to fight for the Native American. They wasn't used to that. And then eventually they'd look up and see these guys and say, uh-oh, there come those guys who fight like a buffalo. And eventually they started calling them buffalo soldiers. And when these guys figured out what they was calling them, they said, well, that name is a whole lot better name than a lot of other names they've been calling me, so they accepted. But actually, these guys got this title because of their tenaciousness in battle. And the Native American reference to buffalo, because when they went buffalo hunting, and you know, buffalo was very important to them. That was their whole life. They had the skin and the hide and the food and the bones for tools and medicine. They revered the buffalo. Anyway, they would go out hunting these buffaloes, and their tactic was to chase them down into a boxed-in canyon. And then they go in and they take their bow and arrows and just shoot as many as they want to shoot. But the buffalo didn't like that. They figured out pretty quick, man, if I don't get out of here, I'm in trouble. So they would bow their neck down and snort whatever they snort and come out of there with everything they had and just plow up horses and people and so forth. They really came out of there. And when these soldiers would charge, this was a semblance to the buffalo when they was cornered. So consequently, they accepted that name as a badge of honor. Now, we're going to talk about the Buffalo Soldiers' participation in World War II. That's a part of our topic today, or is our topic today. And when we look at that, we look at certain things. One, what was the philosophy of these guys? What did they attempt to accomplish? And what were they all about? Well, example of this would be what Frederick Douglass said about them. Frederick Douglass was the famous abolitionist, and he said this to Abe Lincoln. He said, once let the black man get upon his person a brass buckle with U.S. on it, let him get an eagle on his button and a musket on his shoulders and bullets in his pocket. There's no power on earth which can deny that he has earned the right of citizenship in the United States of America. And based on that belief, the government designated Buffalo Soldiers, the 9th and 10th Cavalry, 24th and 25th Infantry. Now we'll stop with the old history part at this point and talk about the World War II part. There were several units in World War II who conducted themselves with honor and accomplishments and so forth. And I guess one of the most important one that you probably hear about is the Tuskegee Airmen. The Tuskegee Airmen was a group of men. Most of them was in college when the war started, and they volunteered to go into military service because they heard that there was a big problem. And you see, the philosophy of Buffalo Soldiers had been always that if we would try to make the world successful, especially the United States successful, and do good and participate, we will be recognized for it. And then eventually we will be awarded for it. And then that reward will go on to my grandkids and great-grandkids and so forth. As you know, it didn't happen like that. It was only until Dr. Martin Luther King got busy that we got things going. But the Tuskegee Airmen at this time decided they wanted to make a contribution. And they wanted to fly airplanes. Because they had been inspired by a guy named Eugene Bullitt and a lady named Bessie Coleman. They both had to go to France to learn to fly airplane because nobody would train them in the United States. This was back in 1916, 1917. And these people went there and they learned to fly an airplane, and we'll just talk about Bullitt. Bullitt joined the French Army at the beginning of World War II. He got wounded and messed up one of his legs. He wasn't able to run, so the French Army said, we got to discharge you. So he said, well, what else can I do? He said, we don't know, fly an airplane. So he went and learned to fly an airplane, and he became an ace fighting for France. Shot down 5 planes in 3 or 4 days. These Tuskegee Airmen were inspired by his life. And consequently, they were sent to Tuskegee and they learned to fly these airplanes. I have a little syllabus over there on the wall that shows some of that business. But these guys was tenacious fighters, just like the original Buffalo Soldiers. They flew the P-51, was a difficult plane to fly. My brother joined that unit, although he got kicked out of the flying part because he was too short. His leg wouldn't push the pedals all the way down. So he became a maintenance man, and eventually he volunteered to go to Christmas Island. And for the old soldiers, you know, the Christmas Island is where they tested the atomic bomb. And he was there and received a lot of radiation and eventually died from this. But the Tuskegee Airmen was in the war for good. They flew the P-51. They were the escort fighter groups. They flew under the bombers and so forth. One of the stories that I heard, which is a true story, that was a friend of mine over in Seguin when I was there. He had gone to a funeral down in the valley with some other Tuskegee Airmen because one of their comrades had died. And they stopped at a convenience store to get gas and do other things. And while they were there, they were dressed up in suits and ties, and they were all black. And then the guy behind the counter said, "Are you guys the ministers going?" They said, "No, we're not ministers." "Well, who are you?" He said, "We Tuskegee Airmen." He said, "Why are you here?" "Well, I'm here to see one of our comrades who's just passed away, and we're going to his funeral." He said, "Wait a minute, you say you guys are Tuskegee Airmen?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know what? I had never had the opportunity to thank you guys." He said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I was in a bomber. I was flying one of them bombers, going over Italy to bomb Germany. And we knew that there was supposed to be some escorts with us. And all of a sudden, we got to the rendezvous point. We didn't see no escort. We called them on the radio. Nobody responded. And we said, oh boy, we in trouble now. We are here by ourselves." Eventually, the Messerschmitts started coming in. And guess what? As soon as they opened up the machine guns, under the bellies, these red-tailed P-51 popped out and shot those Messerschmitts to pieces, just like that. Because these guys are just like the original Buffalo Soldiers. They figure out how to do it. Not necessarily by the book, but what works. They knew that if they would rendezvous with this bomber and kept their mouth shut on the radio, the enemy's not going to know they're there. And they came in and they thought they had things going their way, and all of a sudden, bang, it shocked them, surprised them. So from then on, they had no problems when the bombers come out, because the German plane would say, "We got to find out what those guys done here now." So the Tuskegee Airmen had to beg to fight and fly planes. In fact, they was almost washed out. And Mrs. Roosevelt, Mr. Eleanor Roosevelt, heard about this. And she thought that was a bad thing, so she came down to Tuskegee to check them out, to see how good these guys were. When she got there, they assembled these pilots. And that was one of the pilots, like in every group, who was sort of a chit-chat guy. He was just he didn't tie his tie right, his shoes wasn't shined, his hair wasn't right, his hat was on crooked. He was one of those kind of guys, and they said, "Now, we will give you a check ride in one of these planes, Mrs. Roosevelt." He said, yeah, I'll take one, but I want that guy to fly me. Because she saw the worst guy in line. And he said, "Oh, no, Mrs. Roosevelt, I'll tell you what, we got the plane ready for you over here. This guy's going to fly you." He said, No, I don't want that guy. I want this guy." Now, one of the things that happened was, he said, "Yes, ma'am, let's go." And he shaped up, got his manners straight, got his nerves straight, He got his business straight and got in that plane and flew it just as perfectly as she could fly one. She went back and told her husband, look, let them guys alone. They are doing their job. The worst one of them down there can beat some other guys doing it. There are other units who fought in World War II. One of the next most important one is the 761st Tank Battalion. 761st Tank Battalion kind of followed the 9th Cavalry. They were established in Clairton, Louisiana, which is now called Fort Polk. And then they were sent west, just like the 9th Cavalry was started there and sent west. They were sent west to Fort Hood. And I think Cal Barkin can tell you about those guys. He was over there with them. His unit was a tank destroyer unit. These guys was medium and heavy tank operators. They could really do stuff, and they had some quirks about them also. Eventually they were shipped overseas. When they got overseas, just like some of the other units, they weren't accepted. They had to beg to fight. And guess who accepted them? Patton. General Patton says, I don't care if he shoots straight, we want it. He wasn't concerned about anything else besides when he shoot his gun. And these guys then fought with Patton through Europe, through Africa, all along the way. Now, they went for 81 days one time without stopping in their tanks. Now, you know they're going to run out of gasoline. And this brings up the next unit, who was important. It was called a Red Ball Express. And it was a whole bunch of units, but these guys were truck drivers. They would drive trucks all day, all night, every day, and deliver supplies. They don't care how far you advance. They had the ammunition, the water, and the gasoline and diesel. Whatever you need, they would have it to you that night or that morning. Because there were two drivers in the truck, one would sleep and one would drive. For 90 days, they did this. And the unit just kept moving, and Patton loved that. So the Red Ball Express is one of the outstanding units they have in World War II. Another one is the Triple Nickel. They were airborne guys. Had to beg to jump out of an airplane. Now, you know, it's kind of a hard life to do, to beg to jump out of an airplane. But these guys did, and they fought valiantly in World War II. Another one is the 12th Special CB Battalion. Now, one of my compadres in Brenham was in the CBs, but the 12th Special meant they was black. That's what it meant when it said 12th Special. It just meant it was a black unit. Had two brothers in there, and they went to Korea. They built buildings and airstrips in the day, and they fought the Japanese at night. These guys had a strange life to live, but that was the calling for them. The last unit of the Buffalo Soldiers that fought in World War II was the 28th Cavalry. Now, most people had never heard of the 28th Cavalry, but they were started in California in 1942. And then eventually they were shipped down to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And at this time, the strange thing happened. These guys was modern day cavalrymen. They was different from the old rough cowboy cavalrymen. These guys had education, they were sophisticated, and they was well trained and trainable. So consequently, they was an elite kind of unit. And here again, nobody wanted them. So guess who took them? Patton. He said, bring them on. And they got to North Africa, and the first thing they found out was them horses didn't do well in that desert. So they turned them horses loose, and they issued some half-tracks. Now, all of that gear, flags, and relics was left in North Africa because they came back as a tank unit. Another one of the people that I like to talk about in World War II, most of us may not have heard about it, but his name is Doris Miller. Doris Miller joined the Navy. That's the only way you get in. He had to volunteer. So he volunteered for the Navy. And at that time, if you got on a ship, the only two jobs you could have, one of them is an orderly, and the other one was a cook. Well, Doris was a cook. Now, when he wasn't cooking, he didn't want to be down below deck. He wanted to be on top of the deck. getting some fresh air. And while the sailors was training to shoot the guns, he was sitting there observing, and he learned how to shoot them guns by just observing. Then they was at Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 41, and they struck his ship. And his comrades figured out that that ship was going to go down, and they didn't get off of it. But what did Doris do? He went and grabbed one of them guns, and he started shooting at them Japanese planes. He not only shot down a few of them, but he scared them away from the rest of the ships over there. Because they were just shocked to see somebody shooting back at them. Everybody's just running and scrounging. This guy was shooting. Now I knew his cousin, and his cousin told me that the attitude of this guy was, look, if I ever get a chance, I'm going to be a real sailor. Because he didn't feel Miss Stewart was a real sailor. A real sailor drive a ship and shoot guns. And he says, if I ever get a chance, that's what I'm going to do. He did that. He came home on vacation and leave and so forth. Guess what he did? He volunteered to go back. He didn't have to go back on a combat ship, but he did. And sure enough, that ship was lost. And we lost him. There's a lot of things that these guys would do like this because they felt a responsibility to develop this country. They felt that they had to give something back and earn the right to be an American citizen. And they figured that a lot of people who couldn't do that would have a problem showing their worthiness. So they would consider themselves an experiment, and that they said, look, we will sacrifice whatever if we can prove to the whole system that we're worthy. And this is the thing about the Buffalo Soldiers that I really want to impress upon you. These folks were people who dedicated their life to proving that they were worthy. Now, I'm not saying they all were good folks, they just like everybody else. But their mission in life was to prove themselves worthy. Now, this philosophy came to them from historic features of people before them. Started in, I guess, in 1773, when the British was kind of kicked out of this country. A guy named Crispus Attuck was the first martyr in that conflict. When he saw the redcoat coming, he decided, now is my chance to prove that I'm worthy. So he gathered a bunch of guys who were standing around the corner, and he convinced them that if we don't want to stop them redcoats, we're going to be in trouble forever with the king. So he led the charge. And sure enough, he was the first guy that was shot and was killed. But that martyr created the belief that we can charge these guys and we can win this war, and they did. There was a group of guys in 1812 who fought at the Battle of New Orleans. This was colored units who were fighting there because these guys was able to get through the swamps and keep their directions and fight the enemy there. Then in 1815, many of the sailors that was on Commodore Perry boat were actually colored sailors, and they manned the ship there. Now the Civil War come along, and there was some groups who distinguished themselves there. The first one I can think of is the 54th Massachusetts Volunteers. These guys stormed Fort Wagner, which was a key place that we had to take before the South could be defeated. The next battle was the Battle of Petersburg. Anybody been to Petersburg? If you go there, you'll find a big old hole, bigger than this building, right out there in the ground. Trees growing up in there now. But that was a key point that we had to get through to win the war. And what happened was, they got there, and if you can imagine a hill with the trenches dug around the top of it, and you down 200-300 feet below, looking up, you can't see the middle of that hill. You don't know what's up there. Consequently, the Union soldiers could not bridge that ford. So there were some miners from Pennsylvania who said, you know what, we make a living digging holes in the side of a mountain. I believe we can dig a hole up under them guys and put some powders there and blow that place up. And they did that. Now the strange thing happened. They had 3 units that they were going to send in and take this place. The first one went up the hill and after the explosion, and they were just in awe at all the dead bodies and horses and things that was in that big old hole, and they just stood there and got shot. And then they sent this colored unit in. And guess what happened to those guys? They was in awe too. Got shot. The third group of guys got there, all the enemy's bullets were used up, and they win that battle. Let me tell you about 2 other individuals. One of them is named Ball. Now, Ball was a slave during the slavery period. And he was the houseboy or the housekeeper of a pretty well-to-do kind of farmer. And during the build-up to the Civil War, that particular individual decided he would side with the South. So he joined up in the Confederate Army, and they made him a colonel, and he came down and organized a bunch of units, and he fought for the Confederacy as a colonel with his unit. And he had Ball with him. Now, some people say that since he was in that unit taking care of this colonel, he was a Confederate soldier. Now, I don't know whether it is not. He denies it, but the belief is he was a Confederate soldier. But eventually, in a battle, his boss man was shot severely. So Ball took him to the hospital and took care of him at the hospital. And then Ball figured out that this guy's not going to get well. I better take him back home to Ohio. So he took him back to his home in Ohio. And there, his family kind of nursed him back to health, and Ball decided to just disappear. So Ball did, and he decided, you know what, I really didn't like what I heard with those guys down south. I really don't believe they're right. I think I'm going to join the North. So he joined the 16th Ohio Colored Regiment. And he goes back and he fight in this war with the 16th. Which was a Union outfit as a colored troop. When the war was over, he decided, you know what? I need some education. Because I found out if you're not educated, you're not going to be able to do too much. So he went back to Ohio and went to high school and got him some kind of education. Then they organized the Buffalo Soldier units, the 9th, 10th, 24th, and 25th. He joined the 24th, which was the actual Buffalo Soldier unit. And he was sent west, and he fought at El Paso, and he fought in the modern area town like Fort Stockton, Fort Davis. He was in combat there. Until he finally wound up in San Antonio when this Indian War was over. He got out of the army, and he became a minister. And he was working with other ministers there to create black schools. He established a black high school. That black high school eventually was taken over by the city of Seguin. It was called Ball High School. Ball High School is still there. It's elementary school now. But if you look at his life, he was able to take the philosophy that we must prove ourselves, and if we do that, we're going to be okay. He was fortunate that he was given help to establish schools of all kinds, Mason lodges, a college, and so forth. He just did a wonderful thing with his life as a result of him. Now, on the other side, there was a guy named Sidney Dearman. He's from Caldwell, Texas. His slave master drafted him into the army. He was a Confederate soldier, wore a Confederate uniform, drove a Confederate wagon. He was one of those guys who actually was fighting a war that he didn't want to fight. But he felt, if I'm going to wear this uniform, I have to live true to the mission of the uniform. And so forth. His great-granddaughter tells me now that he said later he was sure happy that they lost that war. All through life, we have found these people who decide that they're going to do well and make the world a better place. That belief, that feeling, that desire transcends more than just soldiers. It went into the educational field, it went into the medical field, the engineering field, and you'll find even today there are certain people who are striving to make things happen. Mayor Pruitt is developing a museum to really show life as it is. And consequently, people like that who is trying to encourage others, use whatever means they have to develop the philosophy that we all need to do well. We all need to provide for ourselves and make things get better. I know that you may have many questions, and we have time, so I want to stop at this point and say thank you so much for inviting me. You've been a wonderful audience, and if you have questions, I'll be happy to try to answer them. Yes, sir.
That's good. You said that the same Calvary people that passed over after you said they lost a lot of paraphernalia over there. Was some of that recovered?
No, sir. It was not. They just turned the horses loose, and all of their paraphernalia was boxed up. All of their records was boxed up and left in some warehouse. And then when Patton, they fought 30 or 40 days with Patton, and they didn't know where the stuff was. When they came back to the States, they came back as a tank unit. So they got new paraphernalia when they got back to the States. So they lost all of that. We have been trying to identify where it is and get it back, but haven't been successful to do it. I would imagine some people just picked it up and whatever. Yes, ma'am.
Were they in Tunisia or where? Did they find Arab and Roma? Was that the cost?
Yeah, they was chasing after Rommel with Patton. In fact, Rommel and Patton were friends. And yes, ma'am. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Talk a little bit about Flipper, one of the more famous officers and the Buffalo Soldiers.
I'm sorry, sir. Which one you were talking about?
Emperor Flipper.
Oh, Flipper. Yes. Yes, Flipper. Flipper was a slave, ex-slave, and he decided that, this country needs black officers. So he applied for the West Point. He wasn't the first guy who went to West Point. The first guy who went to West Point was so disappointed that he quit. But Flipper went there with the attitude, I am not going to be denied my rights to become an officer, a West Point officer. Flipper was there for 4 years and graduated. Not one other cadet would say a word to him during that 4 years. Only the teachers would talk to him, but none of the cadets would talk to him. He says, I don't care. I'm here to get my lieutenant bar, and I'm going to do that. When he received his bar, he was assigned to the 10th Cavalry, and he was sent out west. He wound up around Fort Davis, in the Davis Mountain there. And he did a lot of things. He fought a lot of battles and so forth. But eventually, he was there at the fort, and they appointed him as the chaplain person, the supply person, and also the controller of the unit fund. That means that any soldier who got paid and wanted to put his money in the bank, which was no banks, put it in the unit fund, and this officer would be responsible for it, and when he got discharged, he issued him his money. He was in charge of the unit fund. There were a lot of officers, these white officers, who didn't like the fact that he was aggressive, that he was educated, he was an engineer, and he could do things that some of them couldn't do because they were not West Pointers. A West Point education is a good education. Anyway, they decided they have to get rid of him because he's going to be troublemaker for us. So what they did, they broke the lock on his locker. And then all of a sudden, they come to him and say, you know what, you got all that money, and that lock broke. Anybody come in and get that money? Oh, he said, I got to fix this. He said, man, I don't know, you can't fix it. Tell you what, not to worry. I got a brand new one down here. You can put that money in my locker for me. He thought that was a good gesture. Put his money in there, and a few days later, they reported that money, some of it was gone. And sure enough, it was gone. So they had a court martial, and he was kicked out of the Army. Yes, sir.
What about the Negro women? Were there any soul sisters in the waves or
Yes, sir.
stars or wax?
Yes, sir. There was a lot during World War II. There's one that come to mind is Miss Wright. She was a Buffalo soldier with the 28th Cavalry in Fort Huachuca. She was a dietitian, and she fed all the men out there in that area. She also wrote a lot of books on food and nutrition. There was many WACs and waves in the military in World War II. Now all of them volunteered. The good thing about it, Mrs. Lois Wright was a graduate of Prairie View A&M University. Most of these people were educated folks, and the Army was very fortunate to have them. Yet there are others.
Just a comment rather than a question. It sounds to me like you're carrying on the tradition. I'm really impressed.
Thank you very kindly. In closing, I'll say yes, I've used the Buffalo Soldiers to what I think is a good advantage. We have a at-risk youth program in Brenham of about 135 kids. These kids are from 7 years old up to 14 and 15 years old. We meet twice a week at one of the local housing authorities. And these kids, the first thing we do when they get there, we separate them into kids who got homework. We put them in a separate room and have leaders to make sure they get their homework for the next day. And then the second thing we do is the little bit of kids, we put them in a separate room and make sure that they can read and understand what they read. And the rest of them, we put them outside and we do games. And these are constructive games. We have football players from Blaine College and so forth come down and teach them some respect for football and so forth. We also take the better kids out of this group and we organize them into a 4-H club. And then for the rest of them, we put them into a Buffalo Soldier unit. We go camping, we go hiking, we pitch tents, we do cooking and all kinds of He-Man things there. Now these kids are not expected to be a permanent unit of a club. They come and they are helped and they go home. Because we wanted to, our philosophy is that if we do a good job with him today, he'll be a better kid tomorrow. And just 2 weeks ago, one of my students called me and said, look, I want to join the Army. Would you go with me to the recruiting station? So I did. And the recruiter asked her, well, why do you want to join the Army? She said, well, because I know the Army is a place to be when you want to do something worthwhile. I want to be a nurse. I don't have enough money to go to nursing school. I'm in Prairie View now, and I can't pay my bills. I'm going to join the Army, and I want the Army to put me into some kind of nursing program. And he asked her, well, why do you want to go to the Army? She said, because I went with this man on a field trip to Fort Hood. And they showed us all them tanks. They took us to the mess hall, showed us the mess hall, took us to the hospital, and showed us the hospital. And she says, there's got to be a place for me in the Army. So she joined the Army. And it's one of the few people that we have gotten that far. We have many of them playing professional football now, basketball, and in college. But this legend, you say, yes ma'am, we continue to do it. Yes ma'am. Yes ma'am.
One more question?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that time? Of course, do we have time for one more? Of course, we in Texas always think that we started everything. So we're thinking about the Buffalo Soldiers starting in Fort Davis and that. But you're telling me that there were many of them even further to the west. You mentioned Fort Huachuca several times.
Yes, ma'am.
So did these men come down from the north?
No, ma'am.
Their conscription, was they volunteer? I know what happened back in the Civil War.
During the Civil War, you know, there were 180,000 who fought the Civil War on both sides, and about 30,000 was killed. Now, the one who was left, joined those 4 units. Well, there were 6 units altogether. Most of them were from the north. There were a few from the south. But the one from the south was sort of docile and didn't have this drive. So they didn't join as rapidly. Plus, they was criticized for joining. The southern economical structure discouraged them from being a part of the military.
I read about that.
Yes, and the other thing was, they was cruel to them. If a guy from the south joined the army, he caught problems going to town. So there wasn't a lot of, but the guys from up north felt this was a better place to be than going to the cotton patch and chasing cattle and stuff like this, so they joined the army. Now, they all were sent west because when they joined the unit and got trained, the people from the south says, we don't want them guys down there. You know, we can't trust them down here. So the South said, do not send them to us. So they sent them to the West. And they fought the War of the West. And they fought all the way from Texas to California, Texas to Wisconsin, Texas to Washington State. They mapped the territory all out there. They put up railroad lines. They put up telephone lines. They did all the surveys and maps and so forth. And they were just there. There was 5 units who did most of the work out there. There was the 9th, 10th Cavalry, colored, 24th and 25th Infantry, colored, and the 7th Cavalry, which was Custer's outfit. All the other units, 6th Cavalry and the rest of those guys, they was back somewhere in the east. And they came out after the combat was over. So those 5 units, 4/5 of them was black guys. And they loved being there. I've talked to 2 or 3 guys who, well, the last one just died about a month ago. He was 111 years old, I believe. He was 111 years old, just passed away. And his statement were, you know, we felt comfortable out west. We don't have to worry about the system. All we have to worry about is getting our daily bread. And we know how to do that. We can survive. We can trade. And so forth. They learned to work with the Native Americans. They knew which tribe to attack and which one not to attack. Because they said, look, you know, there's some standards out here. If you operate these standards, we'll never bother you. Get out of those standards and then we're going to be your enemy. And they kind of got to report each other that way.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so very much.
Go out and embrace the weak, do well, and be worthy.
Thank you. Thank you. Where's my gentleman with the... Yeah. Here you go. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it.
Yes, sir.
I'll be getting in touch with you.
Okay, sir.